Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to the Stop Overthinking podcast. This is episode 52, Grief for Life Not Lived. And this episode came about, as many do, as something that just kept coming up over the last couple of weeks. Oftentimes when I'm working with clients on what they want, and they're coming for me looking for clarity and direction and to get off of autopilot. And so this can be a really powerful and exciting exercise for many. And I know for me so I have the opportunity to move, and that gives me so many options. Where do I want to go? What do I want to do? What do I want that life to look like? How do I need to plan for it financially? And these are natural things that we think about, and it's really helpful to get off autopilot and to start living forward intentionally. And inevitably, what also comes up with clients at some part in this conversation is a desire for things that they want in life and feel like they can't have. And I want to talk a little bit about how we think and how we feel when we're fantasizing, when we're dreaming, not about the lives that we still could have and the lives that we can create, but about the lives we know that we won't have. This recently came up for me personally when I was at a restaurant eating brunch with my teenage daughter on Easter Sunday. She brought up that she really misses the large family gathering for the holidays that included both her mom and her dad. The holidays now are split because we're divorced and they're separate for her. And her dad has another partner and two small children. And she was lamenting that she's never again going to have a birthday holiday or gathering that is just the four of us, mom, dad, and her brother and her. And my heart ached for her for a lot of reasons, in part because I've had these same thoughts, and I had to grieve a lot of what will never be when I got divorced. And it took me a long time. From having all the small moments with my kids when they are little, because I don't see them every day, to not having a 50-year wedding anniversary with someone. So these thoughts and ideas weren't new for me. But I think they were for my daughter in the way she was expressing them. I don't think she had ever really given herself permission to grieve. And I had to go through that grieving process in order to really embrace and accept my new or current life at this point. So it was something I wanted to talk with her about so that she could also be more accepting and not in a regretful state of mind. So I totally recognized what she was saying. And please hear me as I'm talking about this. It's not so much about regret and wishing that things were different and changing the past, but you probably made choices along your life that did change the trajectory of your life, like where you went to college, and that determined who you met, what you majored in, and what job you eventually went to. And even jobs as you have gotten older, what you took, what you rejected, the opportunities that moved you forward. This is about dates that you pursued or didn't pursue. Even one of my very best friend chose to not have children. And I see her now, she's a little bit older than I am, but she was able to take early retirement and has two homes, and her discretionary income looks very different than mine. And her life looks different than mine. And there's times that I see that and I have a longing for that kind of life. And it seems really appealing. And yet I know that I made very intentional choices, even with fertility treatments, to have children, which means everything from the sleepless nights and the teenage angst and everything else in between. So I'm never going to have that other life without children and all the stuff that comes with it. Right? So you have likely had some of these scenarios as well. And I think it's also really important to give yourself space at times to grieve those things Because if we don't make enough space to grieve the lives that we haven't lived or that we will never live, it just sits with us. And when I say grieve them, I don't mean to wallow and ruminate that the other life would just be better and we'd be happier. Again, that's not what I'm talking about. If I was still married, I would still be having a human experience. The holidays that my child wants would not have all been joyful. And we know, and I talk a lot about life being 50-50. Overall, it's a pretty even distribution of good and bad. And sometimes it might even seem like it's 60-40 or 70-30 or 80-20 at moments or seasons. But that doesn't mean that you aren't giving up a different version of your life. And it's okay to have clean grief about that. And what I mean by clean grief is what I was just talking about. You're not beating yourself up. For all of us who are hard on themselves, you're not saying that I made the wrong choice. It's about owning the choices that you did make. And it's okay to have that clean grief. And I think sometimes we don't allow it because we're afraid of regret. We think it means that we made the wrong decision. And we don't want to feel regret because if we start to feel regret, then it means I made the wrong choice and I'm a bad person and I did the wrong thing. And all of these what ifs can start to spiral. And we get into this thinking of, I would have been happier if I had just done this other thing. So be aware when you feel this sadness or grief about a life that you won't live or aren't living, and you don't need to suppress it because you're afraid that having the feeling is going to mean something about you and the choices you made. You can feel it. And sometimes we aren't willing to feel that grief of leaving what we have for something different. And sometimes we aren't willing to feel the grief of giving up an idea of what we might have and committing to what we do have, right? It's that whole saying of when you pursue something, you're walking through a doorway and another doorway probably closes, or at least you're not right in front of it anymore. And if you stay stuck in that limbo, it's like you're not fully committed to your current situation. It's hard to feel that joy. It's hard to be in the moment. We're not taking action and intentional forward action on our current life. So if there's any version of this that you're experiencing, I want you to know that it's okay to feel grief about the lives not lived. But here is what you also need to remember. When you are imagining the life not lived, you are only imagining the highlight reel, right? It's like social media. And usually when we have a fantasy like this, we imagine that we'd be happier in that scenario, that we wouldn't be irritable or upset or feel lonely or hate our bodies or anything else that goes on in an actual day-to-day human experience. I mean, at one point in my life when I was studying abroad in college and I had this fleeting fantasy about meeting my soulmate in Spain and then living this international life. And when I imagine that and what I was thinking when I was in my early 20s, I was sauntering down a beautiful street in southern Spain. There's flowers everywhere. I could smell the orange trees blooming. My hair looked perfect. My body's great. I'm laughing with some dark-haired man, right? I mean, that's all a fantasy. I'm not imagining the lonely nights I would have experienced if I moved internationally and gave up families and customs here in the States. Any place that you live, any relationship you have, all of the choices that you make are going to have its ups and downs. That's the whole 50-50 of life experience. Some of these things that we pursue are absolutely worth doing. It's the right choice. It's still going to be 50-50. There's no perfect life that you're missing out on where you always feel like you're in this movie highlight reel and you never have inconvenient, messy, painful experiences of being a human or being a woman. So my advice to all of you is to allow that grief for your lives unlived. Let it flow through you. Journal about it. Think about it. And remember, it was just a fantasy. It was just a set of thoughts. It wasn't reality. Keep it to the clean pain. You're grieving a fantasy, and that's okay. You don't need to buy into the belief that because of the choices you've made or that you're going to make, that you can't be happy or you can't be fulfilled and you can't have some other perfectionistic fantasy of the human experience. You don't tell yourself that it's only available in this fantasy world because the perfectionistic vision of a human experience is not available to you in any world. So I hope this helps you either now or at some point in the future, and you get that longing of what if, but you know it will never be. It's perfectly fine to experience that. It doesn't decrease the actual life that you have. You are accepting the life that you have and living forward intentionally with your values and your priorities and making conscious choices on how to create the joy and peace and calm and confidence that you want every single day. Talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.